Hello everyone. Welcome today. We will be reviewing our 2022 corn grain trials that we've performed this year. We will start with the replicated plot data that JG Ag Service in Mount Joy performs for us, and we will also be looking at our side-by-side trials we do in field throughout the season. All right, so the first thing we're going to look at today is a replicated plot data. This plot data is contracted through JG Ag Service in Mount Joy. They plant and harvest the plots for us, so our hands are off of it from start to finish. It is a replicated plot, so each hybrid is planted 3 times in a grid pattern throughout the field randomly to get a good average throughout the field. So the first plot we're looking at here is our longer season maturity. It ranges from 109 to 115 day. We had 23 entries this year in the plot, and it's some pretty significant differences here. And the plot range was from 125 to 178 in yield. This field here was in some of our droughtier ground this year. Received, I think, about 16 inches of rain from start to finish of the season, with the vast majority of that coming before July. So there wasn't a whole lot of rain after July, and yields have definitely reflected that. A couple of highlights we're looking at here. The 5982 this year for DeKalb was above and beyond probably the most consistent product we saw this year. One thing I didn't think was represented well was the 6141. Wherever we had that, it's been phenomenal last year and this year as well under stress. But it has not typically done great in plots. It's a shorter stature plant and just doesn't seem to do well in plots. But in field, it has been very dominant. Another one here to highlight is the 12F08Q Brevant. It is more of a dual-purpose silage corn. Got good grain potential. Obviously didn't stress too well, but in most cases this year has been pretty phenomenal. So one other thing we're going to notice here is there's a new number that pops up here, this DKC 11135. DeKalb's numbering system is going to change here in the upcoming years. They're starting to run out of numbering sequences they can use in their current pattern. So the first 3 numbers, or the first 2 numbers in a lot of cases, are going to represent the maturity. So there's no more adding 50 to the first 2. It's just straight. The first numbers before the dash are going to be the maturity of the corn. So this DKC 11135 is going to be 111-day corn. So it makes it a little simpler. But we will see a change with that. So if you look at the numbers of this plot and the difference from top to bottom, and different companies and their averages, we're going to look at those numbers real quick. You can see the average per company is significantly different from one to the other. AgriGold tops out 168. DeKalb's following there closely at about 164, and the rest here go down pretty quick from 150 to 137. So when we look at that from a revenue perspective in a plot like this, how big of a difference are we actually seeing? So for current corn prices, $168 an acre would equal you $1,179 an acre at the top. And the bottom company, which is Brevant, which is seed that we do carry, you're at $961 an acre. So that's a pretty big difference in a year like this, where every dollar counts. We got higher inputs and everything else going on this year. But to put that in perspective, we'll take the 2 biggest companies here, the DeKalb and the Pioneer. You know, what's the difference there in this plot? So the difference is $163 an acre less revenue with the Pioneer versus the DeKalb, which equals to $384 a bag. And what's that saying is even if you had that bag of seed for free, you could still pay $384 for the competition, and that's your break-even point. So that's a pretty significant difference here. I know that seems a little extreme, and we obviously had quite a few more DeKalb reps in the plot than Pioneer. But even if you take the bottom 3 DeKalb in the plot versus the Pioneer, there's still a pretty significant difference there in revenue per acre. So next slide we're going to look at here is the shorter maturity plot. So we're looking at 100-day corn to 109 or 110-day corn. The shortest maturity in there we had is 100-day. It's 5088 DeKalb. It really took it on the chin with the stress because it was right as it pollinated and filled grain out. There was absolutely no moisture, so it really took a beating. A couple other noteworthy things in here. This new 105-day decal looks pretty impressive. In field, in plots it was decent. It wasn't quite at the top, but it seems to have some pretty good stress tolerance to it. And the two most noteworthy things are the 5982. Again, just has been the most consistent thing we've seen this year. And this AgriGold 639.70 has looked exceptional this year. I'm pretty excited about that one. It looks to have a lot of potential going forward. Last slide here we're looking at with the replicated data is the comparison from last year to this year. I think it's pretty interesting to see the type of year we had. Last year's plot average was 279, as compared to this year is 155, so that is a pretty big hit there. And the most interesting thing about these two plots is a Brevant hybrid here. It's 13A10. Last year it came in at a whopping 292. We didn't sell a whole lot of this. I was a little hesitant on it. Just had that typical ginormous plant type. Looked to have maybe some standability issues. We saw some inconsistent yield data out of it last year, so we really didn't push any of it. And I'm glad we didn't, because you look at the swing on this one. So last year it topped the plot at 292. This year it was dead last at 125. So it lost more than half of its yield from one year to the other just due to stress. So this is why we do testing multiple years before we really start pushing them down the road. So next we're going to look at our side-by-side trials. Every year we do these side-by-side trials by planting corn with a 16-row corn planter. We split the planter 8 and 8, so a hybrid on each side. And we come back and harvest with an 8-row corn head. And this way we can get larger trials over multiple acres in different yield environments for two varieties. So here we go. First variety we're looking at is 5982 versus P0924. 109-day hybrids that are pretty popular in the market. 5982 showed out really well last year in higher yield environments and is also showing out well this year in lower stress environments. This year, in this particular test, it 10 bushel advantage. Did have better standability overall. P0924 did have good plant health, started to degrade at the end a little bit, but was higher in moisture as well. Next trial we're looking at is 5982 versus P0953. 5982, this is a very low yield environment field, 100 bushel farm average, incredible amount of stress. 5982 is far better on the stress tolerance end. Even here, this is one of the better parts of the field, and we had 141 bushel versus 117. 0953 showed very poor stalk quality and grain quality overall. So we had a 24 bushel yield advantage here. Next one we're looking at is AgriGold 639.70 versus 5864 DeKalb. 5864 was a great performer last year in high yield environments. Seems to have a couple issues this year. And in this case lost by 17 bushels to the AgriGold. This 639.70 has looked very, very good in trials. Had a little bit of it last year out. This year it looks really good. This looks like a good hybrid going forward. Next one we have the same field, but 5864 and 0947Q. Here they show the exact same yield over a 5-acre stretch. 5864 overall better stalk quality. The 0947 was definitely higher in moisture. Next one we have here is 6141, which has been very good this year as well, versus PO 1077. This is a fairly decent farm for us this year at 174 bushel yield average. This is shalier type soil. 6141 definitely has some tops broken out and was starting to degrade a little bit, but the 1077 was really bad standability. Most of it ended up going through the combine as we went through it, and we had a 6 bushel yield advantage with the 6141. Next one we have here is 6141 versus 1136 Pioneer. 6141 has been very consistent. This is a more stressed part of the field. We had a 17 bushel yield advantage with the 6141. The 1136 had a little better stalks than the 1077 down further in the field, but just did not have the did not have the yield advantage like the 1077 did. Next one we're looking at is DeKalb 6390 versus 1289 Pioneer. We had a 9 bushel yield advantage with the 6390. Overall, great yield this year under stress. Stalks were average, did have some tops breaking out and some stock quality issues there towards the end. But the 1289 poor yield had even worse stock quality than the 6390. Next one we have the 6390 versus Pioneer 1587. Again, 6390, great yield. Had a 6 bushel yield advantage here. The 1587 is a longer season plant, massive plant type, probably 18 inches taller than the 6390, also much higher moisture. Next one we're looking at is DeKalb 6270. This was a new one last year versus Brevant 13K20. 13K20 was brought to us this year to try. Was supposed to have some pretty good potential behind it, but we found out the stress potential behind it is pretty bad. This first block here is in the worst part of the field, and we had a 30 bushel yield advantage with the 6270 over the 13K20. And we split this in 2 parcels. This was a fairly large plot. These hybrids were split over a 40-acre span. You get down to the better part of the field, 6270 again, still 26 bushels, over the 13K20 in the higher yield environment part of the farm. And 13K20 was also higher in moisture. Both had about equal stock quality, but at no point in time was the 13K20 keeping up with the 6270 at all. Going forward, the 6270 looks like a very positive 112-day maturity corn. You can actually see this map here. This is a map of the whole field, and you can see in instances where we had these hybrids stripped, and you can see one hybrid massively falling behind in certain spots, and same with going across this hill. Some of these darker red streaks are that 13K20 falling behind that 6270. So this is why we do some of these trials, to kind of judge hybrids before we bring them completely to market. We try to get a year of these under our belts to see how they do in in-field testing. So overall, looking at side-by-sides, we have the DKC versus Pioneer. Overall, the DeKalb averaged 12 bushels in 6 plots. So that's $84 an acre advantage, or $197 a bag. So that concludes our side-by-side trial data for this year. Make sure you tune back in soon. We are going to have our some of our Pivot Bio results, silage results, and we also have some fungicide and some starter trials coming up. Thank you.